I'm Diane Holzer, the chair of the Advisory Council. I'd like to please remind everybody to turn off their cell phones or set them to silent or vibrate. This meeting is being webcast. If you would like to provide public comment, please fill out a speaker slip in the back and give it to Mrs. Moriarty. Mrs. Moriarty, please identify yourself. There she is. MAC members, as a reminder, sorry. During today's meeting, any items requiring a vote will be done by a roll call vote. This means that once a motion is made and seconded, Mrs. Moriarty will call each of the names individually to request our vote. I would like to now call the meeting to order and ask this Mrs. Moriarty, please call the roll.
Ms. Abe.
Present.
Dr. Adams.
I am here.
Ms. Bralia.
Present.
Ms. Dugan. Ms. Perez.
Present.
Ms. Holzer.
Present. Thank you. The quorum is present. So moving to agenda item number 2, public comment on items that are not on the agenda. I have one public comment speaker slipped here from Molly Hanber.
Okay. I wasn't sure if my concern fell under number 9 or not. Basically, I'm here before you because I'm a new mom of a 3-month-old. So I gave birth in August. I'm sorry. Oh, sure. Is that better? Yeah. Okay, sorry. So anyway, I'm a new mom of a 3-month-old, and I did a home birth, and overall, I had a wonderful home birth experience. I'm so glad that I did it. But there was a hiccup along the way. I was really fortunate to have a very healthy pregnancy. Everything went absolutely stellar, like could not have been better. But I was one of those women who went all the way to 42 weeks. We did the whole 9 yards. But I was really comfortable at 42 weeks. And I was really shocked and kind of frustrated when I learned that at 42 weeks, I had to be referred to an OBGYN, which I absolutely adamantly did not want to do, especially because everything was going so well. I was completely healthy. My baby was completely healthy. I was thrilled with the experience so far. And so we were down to the wire, like 24 hours to go, less. And I had been, trying herbs that were just absolutely disgusting, using a breast pump to try to induce. Finally, we resorted to the castor oil, which was a horrendous experience. I was violently ill, vomiting, diarrhea, dehydration. It was horrible. And I cried for hours. I'm sorry. Effectively, it ruined my final night with my husband before our family was born. I had no dignity. I was hysterical. And I'll never let that happen again. So in spite of that, I had a great birth. It was a very easy labor and birth. My son was born completely healthy. Everything really, really went well. But this law that is requiring women to be forced into a referral to a doctor that they don't want to see at 42 weeks when they are completely healthy, it felt like a huge violation of my rights as a woman, as a human, as a pregnant woman. I have literally never felt so violated in my entire life. So I want to propose a solution to address that, because when I looked at the laws, it was lumped into a category it almost didn't seem to belong in. There were things in there about placental abruption, maternal infection. Things that sound quite serious where you probably should see a physician. It'd still be nice if you had the right to choose whether or not to be referred, but nonetheless, very serious conditions. But 42 weeks pregnant, you can still be completely healthy. It doesn't have to be a serious medical condition. And that's how my situation was. I was completely healthy. Everything went so well. And I am proposing that there be a rewrite to the law, an amendment of sorts, because it doesn't seem to belong in that category. And if we moved it into its own category, and maybe midwives need to be required to recommend or to inform clients at that point in time that the California Medical Board recommends that they be referred to a physician once they reach 42 weeks gestation, that might be a reasonable solution. But it just felt inherently wrong to force that on me. It caused so much unnecessary stress, physical, mental. I mean, please make no mistake, I was harmed by this law physically and psychologically. And since my experience, I have talked to too many women who share in that experience. So I would, sorry, I'm probably still very hormonal. I would like you to please strongly consider making this kind of a change. There was no reason. There was no reason for this. I was so healthy. And it took what should have been a really, really positive experience, and it threw quite a negative wrench into it. And I look forward to having more kids. I look forward to having them at home with the same midwife. I really hope there is a way we can avoid this in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Holly. Are there any other comments from the public? Okay. Then we can move to agenda item number 3, approval of the minutes from the August 22 Midwifery Advisory Council meeting of 2019. Are there any additions or corrections to the MAC meeting minutes from the members? May I have a motion to approve the minutes from the August meeting as submitted?
Motion to approve the minutes from the August 22nd meeting.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Any public comment from those in the audience? Please, Mrs. Moriarty, can you perform the call?
Ms. Abe,
Yes.
Dr. Adams,
Approve.
Ms. Bralia,
Approve.
Ms. Perez,
Approve.
Ms. Holzer.
Abstain. I wasn't here. Okay, then moving to agenda item number 4, the report from the chair. Well, it's been quite a busy summer and fall with lots of activity with meetings and task force work. I have to say I continue to hear from midwives all over the state about the issues they're having obtaining birth certificates and social security numbers for their babies. Claudia and I collected many examples of that this summer and forwarded them on to staff, the medical board staff, for investigation. And I continue to collect them and forward them on. I probably get something every week I got something this morning from a midwife about their ongoing struggles with obtaining the legal paperwork that they need. So it's a big, big problem, and I look forward to seeing what staff can recommend to help us in our next step that we need to take to begin to solve these issues. One particularly disturbing piece of many of the accounts that have been forwarded to me, in the accounts, the people that are telling me the stories believe that there's racial bias involved in these barriers to obtaining the social security numbers for their babies, which that it makes it even more serious for me. I mean, it's a serious thing anyways, but if this is really true that that's what's happening, we need to be quick and remedy the situation as soon as possible. And most of these racial bias accounts are coming from the Sacramento area, so I think we need to look close at what's going on. Consumers of midwifery care really don't deserve to be harassed or denied access to legally required paperwork for their newborns. I missed the last meeting, but I was very intrigued with the idea of collection of the ethnicity of the midwifery clients in the Elmar. And so I would personally like to, I'll put it on the agenda, go forward and try and investigate if this is a possibility to add that amount of information to collect in the Elmar. I'm pretty excited, like I said, about all the work that we've had. I worked a little bit with the task force on the guidelines revision. That's been an ongoing process, and very excited to hopefully get to the end of that. And lastly, I also want to just send out some healing prayers for our colleague Jocelyn Dugan, who isn't with us today because she was in a pretty serious car accident. So if we could all just keep her in our thoughts for a good recovery. That's it. Any questions or comments? Any public member comments? Seeing none, we can move on to agenda item number 5, update on midwifery-related legislation with Ms. Brigley.
At the last medical board meeting, there was a proposal to write and propose legislation denying women who've had a previous cesarean to have a home birth with a midwife or birth center birth with a midwife to prevent LMs from attending VBACs. There was a large presence of midwives and midwifery students at the meeting. The San Diego community came out in force, and there were also some consumers there. We told many stories. The medical board really has no idea what is involved with VBAC, what the issues are, or even that licensed midwives can't do them in the hospital. So what ultimately happened was, as each person got up, they gave more information about how clients are desiring VBACs. They're desiring vaginal birth after cesarean, and that the research shows that it is actually safe to, and that licensed midwives are doing a good job. I got up and spoke about the requirements for midwifery education, in that midwives are educated about the additional risks of VBAC at home. And ultimately, the decision was made not to pursue legislation in a 10-2 vote. At the same time, we were directed to come together and see if we couldn't find a common ground, because even though the medical board would not be proposing legislation, they felt that somebody would. So we should be proactive about that, and perhaps, and we did get that on the agenda today, to be able to talk about what I believe that we can talk about, what we would like to do moving forward in proposing legislation or safeguards, or finding some middle ground that we can all agree on, so that midwives are able to continue to provide care to VBAC clients and not be constantly fighting for that right.
Comments from the members? I just wonder how that all, and I guess this is a question for Carrie Webb. I just know, where did that come from? I mean, wouldn't legislation that affects us come to the MAC first, or where did that all come from anyways? It seemed like it came out of the blue to me.
Proposed legislation goes to the medical board at its fall meeting. And so with the timing, that's why it went to medical board first.
But who wondered,
Medical
who was,
board decision.
so the medical board itself made the decision about it?
Staff proposes
Staff proposed it.
legislation for the medical board to consider.
Okay. So it came from staff originally.
Yes.
But I think the question is it was about the licensed midwifery practice, and it seemed to be no input from licensed midwives. Or am I correct or incorrect? Okay, I was like, wow. It seemed inappropriate. Was that the only one, or is that how, I'm new to the board? Is that how
Inappropriate for the medical board to have that on their agenda?
maybe inappropriate is the wrong word, but if this is the Midwifery Advisory Council. The word advisory in Midwives is in there.
Mm-hmm.
So if it would seem like if it's about guiding midwives and consumers of midwives, you would want to ask the experts. So that I think it's important to ask. That's intentional. So we should think about what's the intention. But that's a side point. If the other point is how can we be proactive? And I think having some law to really state, the protocols and so forth. I think something like along that lines. That's my first thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Which sounds like that's what staff was thinking, is that if we had a law about VBAC, then it would be clear. But that's tabled for now, so we just have to make some kind of a plan about how we're going to go forward with that. Any other comments from the members?
Yeah, so I'd like to agree that it does not seem appropriate to not ask for input from the advisory council before the proposal is made. I also wanted to say that interestingly enough, the next day there was a presentation on maternal mortality in California. And one of the medical board members who voted that he did want to continue with the proposal to write legislation banning VBAC, asked what were the mortality numbers for people who were having VBACs. And the woman who was giving the presentation said that's not really an issue, but cesareans and repeat cesareans contribute significantly to the maternal mortality rate. So I thought that was very interesting, that it's not the VBACs that are the problem, it's the cesareans themselves, which licensed midwives are very good at getting babies out without cesareans. I think that's all I had to say.
I have a question. When bills are brought up for other providers, are consumers and groups told about those bills that are coming up, or is it something that all providers and consumers are responsible for? We can tell I think we all are really caught off guard about how something so huge that can impact so many people's lives can just be put on the table without, thank God there were ways that we were able to find out and lobby. But is that so that any group, any bill can be brought up that way without the group being informed?
Well, the group is informed by the publication of the agenda, notifying individuals. That's how we had such a large turnout and active participation, is that the public was notified that this was going to be up for discussion.
That was after the fact, though. I don't know if we get answers here, but it's just for the public record that I would like to say that was wrong. It was completely wrong, and I myself, it was too short a time for me to change my schedule to even lobby. But it's before it got on that agenda. There should have been a way for us. We were caught off guard. If we're the Midwifery Advisory Council, doesn't seem right. I don't know how else I could say it. I'm sure I don't know. I'm just going to say how I feel. I feel that was wrong. That shouldn't happen. At some point, maybe we're not an advocacy or protecting the public. I hope that we would. hearing that mom cry, that's just moving. And it just bothers me. I'm so troubled in my soul that something like that could happen and everyone has to change their life and fly down and protest. And I'm glad the vote turned out that way. But what if it hadn't? So it's just troubling. I'm very troubled.
Well, the structure is that the medical board does make these decisions and can ask the MAC for input and advice. And when the legislative proposals, you can anticipate that legislative proposals will come at every fall medical board meeting. And with the timing of the MAC versus the medical board meeting, that's always going to be an issue. But any proposal would ultimately be discussed here, like as what is happening now. And bills, proposed legislation have to go through a very laborious, rigorous review process through the legislature that would involve public comment and I know strenuous advocacy from midwives in the community.
Then, you said that it's always going to be that way because of the nature of when the bills come through. So sounds to me that it would be possible to change perhaps the timing of our meetings. I think that's a consideration so that that doesn't happen. I understand that the board doesn't have to consult this council, but if it intends to, if that's part of the function, then we should consider changing the timing of our meetings.
Absolutely.
Can I make a motion?
Well, we need to get public comment.
Oh, okay.
Any member? I see there are comments from the public. Carrie.
Hi, Carrie Sparrowon, licensed midwife. It seems to me that if the driver was the staff for this proposal for a bill, my guess is it didn't all of a sudden come up in October that this was a good idea, since it's been an ongoing issue, how we're going to regulate prior cesarean sections, at least since the bill passed in 2013 that effectively nullified the regulation that told us how we were supposed to deal with VBACs. So it's not something new. It could have been brought to the MAC at the end of August. I'm sure y'all talked about it before then. So to say that the MAC meeting doesn't happen close enough to the fall board meeting kind of doesn't make sense to me. But in any case, what I really wanted to say was that the regulation 1379.19 is still on the books. And that means it's still a law. And it is the regulation that set forth our standard of care. And Part B of that regulation tells us exactly how we are to address a prior cesarean. So there, in fact, is still a law on the books. It's on the medical board's website. It's on the Office of Administrative Law's website. Anybody can get to it. Anybody can see it. It's still valid as far as I can understand until it's repealed. And it hasn't been repealed by the medical board, so I assume they still want us to use it because it's still there. So my advice to midwives is to still use it. It's still a law, and unless and until it's repealed, it's still usable by us. My second
Can you
recommendation.
tell us what Part B says exactly, Carrie, for the record?
I don't have it in my head.
More or less.
But it's an outline of the criteria for consenting a woman who has had a prior cesarean section. It doesn't say how many prior cesarean sections. There's no number count there. One of the requirements is that she be given the current ACOG fact sheet on home birth and VBAC. But there's I don't know, there's 4, 5, or 6 items in it. It's what we lived by from 2005 until 2013, and I think most midwives are still kind of using it. it's a good basis to go by. I would recommend that, if the board takes up ever writing the regulations that AB 1308 invited them to write, that could be incorporated in. There's no evidence whatsoever that anything has changed since we created that regulation in 2005. And I'd like to reiterate that we created it with ACOG. Their lawyer helped write it. So for them to turn around now and say, hey, it's not a good regulation without any evidence of that, they need to be called on it, because there's zero evidence that all of a sudden midwives have started having bad outcomes from VBACs. It's just the evidence is not there. And thankfully, since last year, we're now collecting statistics specific to VBAC so that we have more evidence to show that. But it's a bogus claim that, midwives are killing women and babies because they're doing VBACs at home. It's just bogus. And I would strongly encourage staff, when they know that something like this is going to come forward, to let the Midwifery Advisory Council know that that's what's happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. Rosanna?
I just wanted to clarify that Quorum has a legislative agenda to put forth a bill. We're actively shopping a bill to potentially resolve all of these issues. And if you're not aware of that, it might be because, for the best way to stay in the loop if you're a midwife is to be a member of Quorum. And then the second best way is to be on the Quorum Google group. So if you want to be kept better in the loop on that agenda, or you can call me and talk to me directly about it. And then if you're a consumer, you're not a midwife, you can join California Families for Access to Midwives, and they will keep you apprised as well of any important legislation that affects access to midwives. But we can talk more about what our bill proposal is, maybe later in the meeting, or I don't know, maybe we could put it on the next agenda for the MAC.
You can ask her. No, you can ask her.
Can we hear it now?
Oh, our bill proposal?
Yeah.
Yes. Well, let's see. So I'm used to talking to folks that aren't familiar with midwifery, so let me recalibrate that. Well, our proposal is actually to, and we need to have consensus among different agencies in the state. We're still talking to the Department of Consumer Affairs. We need to speak more directly with the medical board around all of this. But we've been talking to Business and Professions Senate and Assembly. We really feel that it's time that we update the Licensed Midwifery Practice Act to be in line with what other states are doing, and that is to be self-regulated. And so our proposal would be to have a midwifery board under the Department of Consumer Affairs, just like all of the other healthcare professionals have. And at the same time, to fix some of the non-evidence-based restrictions on practice that are in the statute. So to resolve the 42-week thing, and then to reinstate what would be a reasonable standards of care back into regulation. And so we already have what was working just fine. Maybe it needs a little bit of updating, but if we put those scope of practice issues back into regulations where they belong, because it's much harder to change statute, then we can move all of this forward, frankly.
Mhm.
And the other thing that it would resolve are these regulatory stalemates, because if the midwives are deciding based on evidence and practice and the scope, what we're actually doing in the community, we wouldn't have these regulatory stalemates. So I invite anyone who has input on this plan to please contact me directly, because there are a lot of moving pieces to this, and like I said, we have to have agency. We have to have consensus with all the various governmental agencies and such. We need to find an author who's willing to carry a bill such as this. It's quite involved. It will require that our fees get raised. That's inevitable. Our fees are probably going to get raised anyway because they haven't been adjusted since 1993. They're only $100 a year. But please contact me directly if you want to weigh in on this, see the language, or have any advice about how to move such a thing forward, or if you have specific objections to it.
Thanks.
Thank you. Look forward to progress on that. Any other comments from the public? You said you wanted to make a motion?
Yes, I would like to make a motion that the Midwifery Advisory Council provide input and recommendation to the medical board on the VBAC issue, which I think is all we're allowed to talk about right now.
Now this is an update rather than an action item, and it would be the medical board's prerogative to have this on their agenda for a presentation.
Mm-hmm. So, is there a workaround?
Staff can advise the president and vice president that this is a request, and they can decide whether to add that to a future agenda, and I'm happy to make sure that the request is made.
Okay. So, what is that the next step? And then we have to. I'm sorry. So is that the next step, and then you come back, and then we start working on a presentation, or can we?
Yes, I can let you know, and they would decide what group would do a presentation, who they would be inviting.
Okay. So does it have to be a presentation, or can we just have staff? I guess it would have to be a presentation at the medical board.
It would have to be an agenda item, and then what that would look like is up for discussion.
Okay.
So does
Okay,
she have
so-
to make a motion to ask you to do
No.
that? Or we can just,
Okay. And we can't start working on it yet. Since everything takes so much time with the timing of all the meetings, it would be nice to be able to start working, to put together a task force to work on that, so that then if it's on the medical board agenda, or if the medical board says that it can be on the agenda, then we can already be working on it and not have to wait until the next MAC to put together a task force, to put together a presentation.
Right.
You know what I mean?
It's just not. It's
Okay.
not an agendized item to do that.
Okay. All right.
So you would want to put that on a future agenda item.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
make a task force in the meantime. No, it has to be on agenda first.
It's
At the meeting,
It doesn't fall into a current agendized item
Okay.
that would notify the public that this is up for discussion.
Okay.
mm-hmm, okay.
Because this is just an update. Yep. Okay. Although the medical board gave you specific okay to put it on the agenda, how I don't know how they worded that though.
Yeah.
Do you remember how they worded it?
Well, I
I wasn't
said,
there.
I asked, in view of the discussion that they had had and their recommendation that we come up with, that we search for a middle ground, that I would like to put that on the agenda or add that to the agenda items we were asking for. And it was approved along with the rest of the agenda items.
So could the presentation, it could be a goal when we get to goals.
Oh, that's a good idea. Okay.
I think that makes sense.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, but thank you very much for asking staff to see if we can get that on the agenda. It'd be fabulous. Any other comments on this agenda item? Okay. Where are we? Oh, okay. Well, perfect segue. Moving to agenda item number 6, goals for the Midwifery Advisory Council. Thank you so much for putting this as a standing agenda item. It's a perfect idea because there are so many things like this that come up that we can then try and put down for new goals for things to work on. So just if we want to segue from that last discussion, talking about creating a task force or something to work on some kind of a VBAC presentation that can be given at the medical board and probably elsewhere as well. Were you interested in heading up a task force to do that, Claudia?
Yes, I would like to head up a task force to make a presentation to the medical board on midwifery legislation and midwife-led legislation. And if Rosanna is willing, I would like to have her be on that task force. The presentation would be on VBAC legislation and on midwife-led legislation, recommending hopefully that they would support and help us find a sponsor.
So I'm just wondering if that's the best use of our time to do a presentation to the medical board. Is that what you're suggesting? Or because I think, so I can imagine actually like speaking to staff about it first, about like to Jennifer Simoes and to Carrie Webb and who's the new interim president? Or not president, but executive director?
It's Christine Lawley.
Christine Lawley. About these issues first, rather than doing a formal presentation.
Right. The issue is that unless we develop a task force to work on the presentation, that with the ongoing schedule of meetings, it will be forever before we actually get a presentation. But so what I would like to propose as a goal is putting together a task force to work on recommendations to the medical board regarding legislation around VBAC and other issues within midwifery, but specifically around the VBAC issue, since that was a request, but I want to leave it open in case other things arise. And I would volunteer to lead that task force.
So, Claudia, your concern is, just to clarify, maybe just to prevent what happened with the Midwifery Advisory Council being left out of proposed legislation. So it would be kind of proactive. Is that correct?
So that we can bring up issues and potential solutions to the medical board, that they, I don't know, they're looking for us to come up with a middle ground and some possible thing that they can be in support of. And so I would like to come up with a proposal as a starting place for that.
Okay, so just to understand, what you're saying is when you left the medical board, that was what they requested. They're like, okay, we won't, it was 10-2 against what was on the agenda at that time. But they said, listen, this is still a concern for us. You guys go ahead, talk amongst yourselves, and come back to us with something that we can approve.
They recommended that we find the middle ground because the major concern is that AB 1308 still is still in wherever in limbo, because we can't come to consensus with other interested parties on the VBAC issue, and that there are being laws, that there will potentially be laws proposed, even though the medical board is not proposing, has chosen not to propose any legislation. The medical board will, however, be voting on whether or not to support legislation. So I would like to proactively have some kind of an advisory response prepared for when that comes up, should that come up.
Okay. And it sounds like, too, it would also be useful, like COM is working on legislation. It would also seem that we had, if there was some kind of legislation that could be offered, or this statement, not more than a presentation, but that would be good, but something saying, I don't know who's proposing legislation, but if two other organizations did that was correcting this, then that would be more to offer to solve the problem.
Right. So the issue at this point is that we can't advise them unless it's on their agenda for us to make a presentation. That was not my initial.
Oh, I see.
Right. So that wasn't my initial thought, that we make a formal presentation at the medical board, but that as an advisory council, we advise them. However, the way to do that is through getting it onto the medical board agenda, preparing a presentation and giving it. So this is all proactive in the event that all of these pieces fall into place. We are prepared.
Okay, that makes sense. So we make presentations to the board, and I get that as a tool. As a tool. However, just to be clear, they can put the agenda item on proposing legislation. I just want to clarify our role.
Our role is to advise.
Is advise and make a presentation. And okay, understood.
Which will get brought to the medical board. Then they will decide whether or not to put it on their agenda, come back to us and say it's on the agenda, and then at the next meeting, after our meeting, we go to them with the presentation. So if we don't have something ready.
Right, I understand.
Right.
And in the presentation, we could include information about proposed legislation.
That's why I left the request for a proposal general as opposed to specific.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll go ahead and second the motion so that we can discuss it.
I'm feeling very like everything is really muddled. I feel like the lines are like this, and I think we need to keep them separate. I don't know how far we're out from the proposal of a midwifery board or the implementation of it. So, and how feasible that's going to be. I know that Calm has been working on it. And if I'm understanding correctly, a midwifery board is going to make all of this necessary. But it sounds to me like the board is concerned about VBAC. That's the sticking point, VBAC. And I think that if we need to present to them VBAC, I don't think they're going to care right now about 42 weeks. I mean, we need to fight a battle that that we have a possibility of advancing in. So it just feels really, I'm just really confused about what's
May
being
I-
proposed. And
May I take a turn?
Do members have to go first and then?
Can we do
Right,
public comments?
I want to give a little more context of how this came about, and that is AB 1308 required the board to do regulations setting forth the lists of conditions requiring physician consultation prior to accepting this person as a client or continuing with this person as a client. And we had a couple of interested parties meetings, came up with lists for both categories, but VBAC was the issue. Midwives don't want VBACs to require consultation at all. And ACOG, CMA, other physician interested parties say that it really belongs in this disqualifies this person as a potential midwifery client. And the issue of the 42 weeks is actually in legislation. It's not part of the board's regulation. That requires a legislative change. So it would be added to that list that it has to be a singleton fetus. It has to have a cephalic presentation, the timing, and that no prior C-section is what the suggestion was, so that the board could move forward with the regulations that it is required to do, and it has not happened. So eventually there's going to be a price to pay for that. The other part of the AB 1308 regulations is that we've heard people come to speak about Medi-Cal accessibility. A midwife can't be a comprehensive perinatal provider until those regulations are completed. So there's been interest, I think, at the last two consecutive MAC meetings that this is frustrating. This is impeding access to care. And so this is an issue where we've thought about different scenarios to be able to move this forward, including attempting to do regulation without addressing VBAC. But we thought that that is unlikely to happen under the current framework, and that it's not appropriate to put VBAC in regulation as a restriction. But we think that could be the direction that was attempted, and that's not appropriate. So this is a conversation starter, as we saw, an important one to get movement, and that is the broader context for this discussion.
So would it be more appropriate to ask for more interested parties meetings than a medical board presentation?
May I add a context here, please?
Sure. Go ahead.
So there was some agreement by the Midwifery Task Force, who were medical board members, to do a statute change. And that was in 2017, and it was considered a compromise. And it would have changed the statute language to say, instead of requiring that the physician make a determination, that the client receive a consultation, and then the client and the midwife were free to choose how to proceed. And that language was approved by the medical board. But when it went to the legislature, it was introduced at the same time as the Bates bill, which was in complete opposite to what the medical board was trying to do. And so the legislature said, no, we're not going to do that, because the supposed interested parties are in disagreement with this. So, I would say that, we all have made good faith effort to put some kind of compromise in place, including the medical board. So anyway, just wanted to add that one other piece.
Thank you. Carrie?
I'm just wondering, since there's turnover with the board, how familiar they are with 1379.19, which has the criteria for VBAC. Is that something that they understand as having been in place up till AB 1308, and that was working? I mean, do the current members know that history or not? Because if they don't, it might be a place to start. Mm-hmm. There's, in my memory of the interested parties meetings that we had regarding VBAC, the midwifery community was willing to negotiate down to one prior low transverse cesarean section. Anything other than that would have to have a physician referral. I think it also behooves us as midwives to recognize at this point that we are an independent profession. And what's happening here is that it's being allowed for our competitors to negate what not only has worked for us, but what we're proposing to put in regulation for the future. And I think that we need to carefully consider what the options are, at the same time that we're making sure that the board members understand the history behind VBAC and LMs attending VBAC and what our current statistics show. And we won't have until the beginning of July, correct, when we get the Elmore stats for this year? Right. Yeah. So it won't be to the July board meeting that they can be presented with those, but then we'll have 2 years of data on VBAC at least. And even if you take all the rest of the years, because I did it, of our statistics, and add up every complication that could possibly have been attributable to a VBAC, it's still a really, really low risk having a VBAC with a midwife at home. It's just the risk can't be shown. It's just not there. And I think that it's easy for physicians to be swayed by other physicians, which is what they're listening to on the board. And I understand that. It's normal. It's the way we are as humans. But if we don't then also provide them with enough of the history that they can understand that, look, midwives have been doing this for decades, literally for decades, because even before we had 1379.19, we were still doing VBACs before that, and we had good results for the most part. And we have a much higher rate of successful vaginal birth after a prior cesarean than most of the hospitals anywhere around. And, the fact that there are a lot of maternal deaths related to cesarean section says that not only are we doing a good job with VBACs, but we may be preventing maternal deaths from cesarean sections. So history is really important as you move forward with this. And I'd be most pleased to work on a task force with that.
Hi, Nancy Greenwood, licensed midwife, Santa Cruz, California. I was trained and practiced in Canada for 20 years, where there are no restrictions like this in our practice, and our outcomes are outstanding. I don't understand how in the legislation we're required to practice based on evidence, and yet this kind of discussion is going on when there's a ton of evidence out there that would settle this immediately. So I just want to say it's like you can't have it both ways. You can't ask us to be evidence-based practitioners and then just fiddle with what we're allowed to do. Thanks.
Any other comments from the public? So right now we have a motion on the floor that's been seconded to create a task force.
I think you should really drill down on the nature of the task force.
Yep, right. That's where I was going. So let's just maybe get it a little simpler so that we all can understand. And
Okay, a task force to create a presentation for the medical board on the history of and current recommendations for licensed midwives attending vaginal birth after prior cesarean, whatever we're calling it.
does that make it a little more clear for you?
Yeah.
Did you want to say something before we vote?
I wonder if you'd like to invite guest speaker Missy Cheney on that. She might be just stellar for it. Yeah. You know who she is, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
And can I also get clarification that what you're asking for is for the MAC to authorize you to represent the MAC to the medical board in given this presentation or discussions on proposed legislation?
Unless Diane wants to give the presentation, yes.
Either one of us can. I mean, see when it falls.
So that's part of this motion
Yes.
that
Sounds good.
you're being
No.
granted that authorization, that you're speaking on behalf of the MAC. Otherwise,
Yes.
you would be speaking as an individual.
Yes.
And this is all assuming that we get it on the agenda.
Exactly.
Right.
Our agenda or their agenda?
The medical board agenda.
Okay.
Okay, did we clear enough to be able to vote? To have Mrs. Moretti call the vote? We have one more comment.
Hi, good afternoon. Christine Lally, Interim Executive Director for the Medical Board. I just had a clarification question in terms of who you plan to have on the task force.
Well, so far there's me, and Carrie Sparavon has volunteered to be part of that task force.
I'll help too.
Okay. Great. Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you.
That leads me to a question. Is there a, do we need to specify who's on the task force? Do we need to specify it at this time?
If it's 2 members.
Of us, but you can have
Right.
outside members that aren't specified, right?
Right.
So there can be outside members that we don't have to specify here today. If we see, we can ask somebody who has particular knowledge, like the VBAC representative right here in this room. She would be an invaluable resource to help us create something. Okay.
Okay. Ms. Abe.
Yes.
Dr. Adams.
Yeah, I approve.
Ms. Brelia.
Approve.
Ms. Perez.
Approve.
Ms. Holzer.
Approve. Okay, well, that's one. The topic of this was goals. Are there any other goals that anybody wanted to put forth at this time? Okay. Any other comments from members?
Actually, can I ask something about goals? I know that in the minutes, Ms. Abe had mentioned, she had brought up about the idea to include some information on the LMAR. Would that be listed in the goals as well? Would this be the?
We could. I do, as I said in my report, I do plan on getting with staff to figure out talk with OSHPD and see if how we need to go forward. And once I do that, then I can put it on the agenda. Or, we could make it a goal if you wanted to do that more formally.
I think it'd be great to make that as a goal.
Okay. You want to make a motion?
Yes, I'd like to make a motion that we consider. Ms. Abe had mentioned that it would be great for us to have identify race. I think I'm looking back on the minutes to see what else she had mentioned on that LMAR. Ethnicity.
Mostly she was talking about ethnicity.
Yes.
Just the demographic information that's standardized at the hospital. When you pull these reports for the state and the county, they break it down definitely by race and sometimes by education and income, so you can understand the health disparities and how certain maternity care practices are, impact different peoples. So
I'd like to recommend that we make that as a goal.
Okay, so ethnicity and race, social income.
Can I make a recommendation on wording?
Sure.
Education, if possible, the standard.
Well, we have to put that in here. What we're talking about.
Carrie Sparavon. It just seems like we're always coming up against doing some revision to the LMAR, adding data, tweaking things a little bit. What if the goal was that every year you'd look at the data you collected and make recommendations for updating it? That be the goal, and then it can be a standing agenda item or whatever you want to have, so that it gets a place to have that discussion on an ongoing basis, so that you don't have to think, oh God, I didn't make it an agenda item, so we can't talk about it. But you could have kind of that in an ongoing way, so that then Natalie Lowe could be updated kind of ahead of the gun instead of under the gun for making changes to the LMAR, so that, we could have this stuff going forward.
Yeah, that's a great idea. So it would have to be July meeting then? We would have to do it?
You could just make it a goal to have it on the agenda every time to discuss updates to the Elmar.
So that would be numbers for this meeting item. Agenda number item 7 would be a standing item.
You have a motion on the floor, Shaman. Do you want to reword your motion?
To have a standing agenda item.
Do you want to do that, or?
Yes.
Okay. Do I have a second?
Second.
Well, you have to complete the statement. I don't know what it. I don't know.
Okay, let's complete the statement.
I think I'm going to need help with my statement. What Carrie said. That we would be able to make suggestions on what to do to improve and add or improve to the Elmar.
To have a standing agenda item
Of suggestions to add or improve to the Elmar.
Okay. And is your seconder agreed with this?
A second.
Okay. So then what would happen with this is that it would become a standing agenda item for next time. Any comments from the members? Any more from folks?
I'd like to make a comment. I am Natalie Lowe with the Medical Board in the Information Systems Branch. I would like to bring up the fact that Medical Board is open to discussions of making some minor edits to the Elmar system. We are open to that discussion as this was a brand new system that was created after many meetings, interested parties, discussions of the contents of the report. At the last meeting, we went over the actual Elmar results and said, there are a couple items that we noticed needed to be changed. But I'd like to make it known that it is not the intention of the Medical Board to continue to make changes to the Elmar system on a yearly basis. Now, if there is a change to law that requires additional data elements, or if there's something that needs to be fixed, obviously we would be making those changes. I'm not saying your goal of having an open discussion can't happen, clearly, but I think we need to be realistic in that we will not be making changes on a regular basis to this. This is a kind of a let's fix anything that needs to be fixed this year, which we are working on, and I will be discussing more possibly in the next agenda item. But I think everyone needs to keep that in mind, that it's not going to be every year, let's add a few more data elements. That's not what the agreement was when Medical Board took on the process of creating a new reporting system.
I wanted to just respond to that what you're saying completely makes sense. However, since this is a new system, and when we do find things that are significant to the public and to midwives, these are things that we would like to be able to bring up. And I understand you're not telling us that we can't bring them up, but if they are significant, I'm not saying to put this on pink paper, but if it's significant, and these are statistics that are being done in a hospital setting or in, things that we feel are important, then we would like to definitely be able to discuss them and bring them up.
I have another comment.
I think it has to be brought up in the context of proposing regulations, because I think this would fall under Business and Professions Code, Section 2516, AK, which is requiring any other information prescribed by the board in regulations. So it's not as simple as saying we want to gather this information, get it approved by the medical board, and ask Ms. Lowe to make it happen. It would have to go through the regulatory process with proposed language and the levels of review to make that happen, and going through the Office of Administrative Law.
It's a big process. Carrie?
Um,
Although, wait a minute, I think, Christine, did you want to say something?
No.
No, okay. Yeah.
I mean, that being said, that doesn't mean that it's not worthy of discussion and initiating that process. It's just, I want you to understand that it is a formal process, but I think it's good to discuss it.
I agree with you that unless it is a standing agenda item, we won't know on an ongoing basis what might need to be tweaked. And just like you're talking about it not conforming really with the data that's collected in a hospital, I found out recently that the number of births that are attended by licensed midwives in this state, as reported on the LMAR, do not equal the number of births attended by midwives at the CDC. We need to figure out how to fix that, and I don't really know at this point how to fix that, but there was quite a discrepancy, several thousand births. And so it's either a reporting issue, it's how the birth certificates are filed issue, and I think we're into the process of trying to figure that out. But it's just another example of, we think we've got it all right, and then we find out something that says, well, actually, maybe it is worth going through a regulatory process to add these elements because they're important. It's important to know what our demographics are, not just birthing families, but also practitioners. I mean, we know that we have a real shortage of midwives of color. We don't know how big a shortage it is because we don't collect the data. So I really, really support you just making it a standing agenda item, and then, you can have the discussion or not. I mean, if there's nothing to discuss at a particular meeting, then okay, move on to the next agenda item, but at least it gives people a place where they can come forward and say, well, gee, I just heard that, we're underreporting about 2,000 births a year to the CDC. So,
Well, CDC only, they use birth certificate data, right? So that's where that discrepancy is.
yeah, but it's a
right?
problem
That's
because CNMs, they're capturing the
upcoming-
CNM data accurately, but they're not capturing ours accurately.
That's coming up.
I have
They're
an
not even
agenda
capturing
item.
CNMs accurately
I
either.
have an update on this particular issue.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we've been in, COM has been in communication with the vital records at the state level.
This is coming up on agenda item number,
Should I
Where
save
is
it for
it?
public comments?
which is the
Maybe
one?
because we're in an emotion right now to make this a standing agenda item or two.
Okay,
ahead.
I will
So
come back to this during
yeah,
public comments. But
well,
you need-
no,
it's-
in- right, in
midwives
item
need to know how
10.
to report their births
Exactly,
accurately,
and-
so we get tallied there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, different.
I will introduce that in item 10.
Okay, so given what Ms. Lowe kind of brought us back to reality a little bit, it is expensive to do this. It's not just, okay, have them do this. It's it's not nothing. So, but given that input, do you want to keep this motion as it is? Is it to create a standing agenda item? And
Yes.
okay. I guess we
Can I
vote.
clarify? So besides it being a standing agenda item, then there was a second discussion about actually working on the updates for demographics, expanding it. So is that two separate things or the same thing?
Both. Is that if it's a standing agenda item, we can talk about it, but I think we can probably
Okay, so first
then
thing is
explore the possibility of whether we can add that or not.
how to move that forward.
Mhm.
Okay, and then the clarification you made was it has to go through a regulatory process
Yes.
to change that. So then, once it's voted on, there'll be a task force, or there'll be a process to tell us how to do that. I think I'm missing the next step after.
Yeah, I think if you proposed a task force and the task force came up with suggested changes, then staff could work with the task force on formalizing a regulatory proposal that would go to the board for approval, and then go through the whole approval process with Department of Consumer Affairs, agency, and then Office of Administrative Law.
Okay, thank you so much for explaining that. So I feel like the latter is very important. Since we only have 3 meetings a year, I do like just having it on the agenda because it goes into the public record, and so that things are not missed. But sometimes you always have to be wise in where we're putting our energy and our focus, since even our meeting is limited. So I don't have the answer to that. But I'm with the latter to move forward expansion of the just basic demographics that are already captured at the hospital level.
Ready. Ms. Abe?
Yes.
Dr. Adams?
Yes.
Ms. Bralia?
Yes.
Ms. Perez?
Yes.
And Ms. Holzer?
Yes.
Thank you.
So at this point, would it be appropriate for us to recommend a task force for that subject? Is that something we can do?
Yes.
Great. Then Ms. Abe, would you like to be a part of that task force?
Yes, that's fine.
Great. I'd like to nominate that. I would love to help you with it.
Please.
Okay, so a motion is on the floor that Shaman and Ms. Ave.
And Ms. Holzer, you can actually just assign them to that
okay.
task force.
Okay, all right, so we don't have to vote on it?
You don't have to.
All right, perfect. I would love to assign you both to work on that. Okay. Anything else under, where are we? I wonder, we're still under the goals. Are we done with goals? Yep. I think so. Okay. Seeing nothing else, we will move on to agenda item number 7, which I'm not sure where that came from. I don't have anything to discuss about the Elmar at this point.
Wait, you said you did.
On the Elmar?
Kind of just did that.
Well, you just said that conversations with them.
No, that I wanted to try and talk about the ethnicity, but I didn't have an agenda item. I don't know. It wasn't on our original agenda, so I'm not sure where it came from.
I have a public comment about the Elmar.
Great. Rosanna.
There were some errors and discrepancies that came up, and we were wondering if they're going to be addressed.
Errors in the Elmar?
I think there were 116 reported surprise breaches or something.
116, uh-huh.
That can't be right.
Are you saying that they're being categorized wrong, or that the Elmar counted them wrong, or?
I don't know, but that number doesn't wash. So if we could get that looked into.
You mean ask OSHPD to look at it, or what would you like us to do?
Yes, I'd like somebody to
Just to verify the number?
verify the number and see if it was a typo, because there were also 16.
16 planned and 116 surprises?
Yeah.
So if there's no updates to be provided by the MAC, I do have some updates that I would like to discuss.
Perfect.
So at the last meeting, we did go through the Elmar report. I went over some numbers. I said that we would go back and look at a few items to double check that items were brought up and discussed that may be incorrect. So we went back through the Elmar reporting system and the report requirements to pull the data. And that specific number that was mentioned was reviewed, double checked, triple checked. We did test data, and the report is pulling the data that was entered. With that said, if one midwife went to enter 1 and entered 100, that would skew your data. That is what we think may have happened. It is not on the report itself, as that data has been verified and the parameters are correct. As we are not able to get individual data from the system because it is in aggregate, we're unable to say with 100% certainty at this point, yes, one midwife entered 115 precipitous deliveries for a non-VBAC breech delivery or whatever the specific number was reported. We did look at it. We are confident that it is correct. So with that said, it brings up another issue of the summary not being available to review prior to submitting the report. That is an enhancement that we will be getting fixed or created prior to the next reporting period, which will be in effect probably at the end of January, that you can begin reporting 2019 data.
Great.
So you'll be able to view your summary, go back, make any changes, then submit it, and then have your final PDF version that will be available. Other than that, there were only a few minor things that were going to be changed. One was in the outcomes, where we listed, let me look at my notes so I tell you specifically. We had birth outcomes after transfer of care, and we were going to be removing a couple of the items that were related to fetal demise, there couldn't be a birth outcome at that point. Other than that, it was making minor changes. There is one area where I've been in discussions with Carrie Sparvon that we're going to be looking into the values that are available to select on, wait for it. Regarding the fetal demise, the additional items that you can select to provide additional clarifying information. So that's another section of the report that will be getting updated. Other than that, we are confident that the numbers reported are being reflected correctly on the report, and hopefully next year, with that ability to view your summary, it may weed that out. Are there any questions from the MAC?
I have a question. So are you saying that you guys might have possibly a worksheet for midwives to be able to use prior to filling out the Elmar?
I did not say that. However, that was in the works from the last couple of years. We do have paper versions that are available to basically complete the Elmar prior to submitting it online. But as we have requested so much additional clarifying information, it's quite complicated to fill it out on paper. We had talked about creating a form that the midwives could attach to their files that may assist them. I don't know how many midwives were actually interested in that, but basically what it ended up being was completing the Elmar in its entirety for every file that you had. You know, if it's a VBAC client, you're checking the box, and then you're filling in all the information that's required to complete it online. So how many prior deliveries, how many prior cesarean, VBAC, etc. And it ended up just being completing the entire the LMAR for each client, which I don't really think would have ended up benefiting the midwife. I did not hear very many, I would say maybe a handful of comments regarding the system. And we tried to address all of those comments that we received. So I think the majority of the midwives that reported were able to complete it and didn't have issues where they needed additional documentation to help them. If I'm wrong, I mean, we're willing to listen, obviously, but I don't think anything additional is going to be done at this point to provide tools for the midwife.
I personally will have to report over 100 and I don't know how many people so far. And if I were to have some kind of a worksheet that would help, and I know that the midwives that I work with in Los Angeles, many of them would also, especially with birth centers, it would make things a lot easier. This last time around, it was a little difficult to fill out. So I don't know how possible that is for that to just be an option, although the worksheet sounds like it might be a lot for some. It might be a good tool for people who can keep that ongoing throughout the year.
Okay. And if we can reach out to you to discuss what you would like to see on that form, I think that might be something that would help us to understand, because really you have, I refer to it as your different buckets. You have your delivered out of hospital with no complications. That's my understanding. I'm not a midwife, but that is the majority of the clients that you are serving and the deliveries you're attending. So that's the largest bucket, and that the LMAR reflects that same information, your out of hospital deliveries, which that's pretty straightforward. You're not getting a bunch of clarifying information for those deliveries. It's the individual births where there was a complication or a transfer or a demise, where then we're saying, give us all of this additional information. And because it's so rare that you're actually completing those additional data elements for a fetal demise or multiple gestation or multiple infants or fetuses, I'm sorry, it just got very complicated to try to get everything on a one-size-fits-all form. So as mentioned, we can work with you if you'd like and see what your ideas are to make it fit for everyone.
Well, Shaman, didn't you say that the problem was that it was just timing out before you could finish all that you needed to finish?
Yes, and I do have, I do have a fetal demise to report. I do have preeclampsia and transfers and concurrent care with doctors, and I mean, I do have all of those things. So that could also be why, I have to go through I don't know what happened to this person after they transferred out of care. Now, so it would be, and those were new things that we didn't have the prior year. So it would be easier for me if I had something also that I could keep track of for each person. That way, when I can hand it over to my staff at the end of the year and say, everything's been filled out, now do the numbers as well with me so that I can input it. And now that we're having more birth centers, our numbers are going up. We're seeing more people. So I think it does get a little more complicated. So that would be great. Thank you.
I just have a quick question. Is it possible, I'm thinking about this breach issue, and you think that maybe somebody just entered the wrong number. Is it possible if somebody puts in a really large number for there just to be a pop-up box that says, you entered 115 breech deliveries, is that what you intended? I mean, I don't know how, I'm not a programmer, so I don't know how difficult that would be, but it seems like if it wasn't difficult, that might be an easy fix on that one.
I can bring that back to our programming staff and discuss it, but at that point, is reporting 3 versus 1 significant, or is, are we looking at 100 as your outlier? Because just like we tell staff here at the board, your data is only as good as what's entered. If you're putting in wrong information, you're going to get wrong information out. And so I understand what you're saying completely. However, with that said, that pop-up should be on every single data element that's entered. Are you sure you want to enter 1 for a fetal demise? Are you sure you want to enter 20 for, an out-of-hospital birth?
I guess it would depend how, this isn't the first time that we've had numbers that were incorrect. I think we had 8 maternal deaths at some point that were wrong.
That was before, though.
Well, yeah, maybe it was before the computer. I don't remember. But if it's all normal stuff, which is the majority of it, then there's going to be very few times when you're going to need to say, for a particular midwife, I'm saying that pop-up box might not come up very often. I just don't know the logistics of programming it into having that pop-up box say, you entered 1, is that what you meant, for all of those outlier situations and not the normal stuff. That ball's in your park, and
Or statistically,
let you figure it out.
Statistically, if you expect 1 to 3% breech deliveries, and it's this percentage, this is say it's double that percentage, then maybe have a pop up. I don't know if you can do that. I know you can do that, but I don't know I know it can be done, but I don't know how that system is, because we're talking about using this report, and I'm just hearing this saying, well, that report's all wrong. If you presented me this report and said these are the midwife statistics, and it had 100 breech deliveries, but somebody just probably put the wrong number in and the system didn't catch it, it's useless.
And it invalidates the entire report.
That's what I mean.
In people's minds. It makes it like,
Again,
okay, well,
so
this
I
is
think
worthless.
it's something that, my point is, I think it's worth looking at fixing.
And maybe that could be part of your task force that's created to make that recommendation. However, it is self-reported data.
Right.
At the end of the day, it is self-reported data, and the midwife is certifying that the information they have entered is the correct data.
But
and when the summary comes back, which will be in effect in January, I would hope that if a midwife entered 100 and meant 1, that they would be catching that. But to say the data is not reliable, it is not the system that would not be reliable. It would be
correct. I'm not
the
saying
data being entered.
I understand that.
Maybe just like to improve the system to the point where the slip of a finger doesn't change all of our statistics. I'm kind of not really seeing how you would accidentally put in 100 instead of 1. I don't see how my fingers would make that work, but I guess it could.
They are far apart. Maybe it could be required that we sleep for 24 hours prior to filling it out.
Except we also have a time limit to get it in, so.
Yeah, right. Anyway.
So if there are no other questions or comments, we are anticipating making the changes that we've gone over, and a few other minor changes will be in effect for the next reporting period. So January, we're going to have that in production. And we will, or staff will be notifying the midwives when the reporting period is available and they can log into the system and enter their data.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Any other comments from the board members, council members? No. Any other comments from the audience? Okay. The next agenda item number 8, report from the task force on Medi-Cal related issues. That was Jocelyn Dugan's report, and she sent me something in writing that she asked me to read. So I have that here. In September 2019, I met with the CAM/CALM Medi-Cal task force. What follow are the takeaway points on what I learned about why isn't Medi-Cal working, including comments from Medicare expert Susan Jenkins, consultant to CAM and CALM. Need better picture, landscape analysis, and barriers. 1. Rules not promulgated and therefore no CPSP access, in quotation, in parentheses, $1,200, or payments to LMs for work they're already doing, i.e. the implementation of SB 407 Morel is blocked by amendments made to the bill, tying it to the implementation of AB 1308 regulations. This was one more political end-round play where ACOG and CMA are attempting to restrict the scope of midwives, and therefore, SMJ, Susan Jenkins. This lack of access is due to ACOG and CMA intruding on the rights of LM clients. They are holding the Medi-Cal mothers and babies hostage so that they can get their way on the VBAC rule issue. These families are not clients of CMA or ACOG members, so CMA and ACOG should have no role in the laws and rules that provide access to the providers. These families prefer LMs. CMA and ACOG are not stakeholders because they are not the providers for these Medi-Cal patient clients. 2. Health Department has yet to process birth center license applications. Position now to start, in parentheses, calm Susan working on for 3 years. Problem was no rules or regulations. Recently agreed to use process we outlined for them, which is essentially what is in the statute. Okay, sorry. SMJ, Susan Jenkins. CDPH, Licensing and Certification Branch, has now begun to process applications. We are finally satisfied that the agency will adhere to the statutory requirements. 3. Approved codes do not cover scope of practice for safe quality care. Still need get it in writing from benefits people at Medi-Cal acknowledging all within LM scope are billable. SMJ. We call on medical board staff and board to clarify these issues with DHCS officials if asked. In parentheses, it is MBC role to regulate LM scope and not Medi-Cal by way of approving a list of codes that restrict scope or access by beneficiaries. 4. Managed care plans. March 2015, we first contacted and began negotiating with DHCS on Medi-Cal coverage of LMs in March 2015. Finally, in December 2018, DHCS issued Directive APL 18-022 to MCPs that they must contract with all 3 LM, CNM, and birth centers. Partnership, a managed care plan, refuses to comply unless it's with a licensed birth center. Other plans take the same position. Medical directors of IPAs don't want to contract with LM or for home birth. Susan Jenkins. We call on MBC to exhort the physicians it licenses that community birth and community birth providers should be integrated into the healthcare system, and other providers should accept them and work with them collegially. Major evidence-based studies demonstrate that when community midwives are integrated into the system with collegial and seamless transport, outcomes are even better. Physicians and hospitals cannot refuse to cooperate or accept referrals from community midwives and then claim that out-of-hospital birth is unsafe. They have an ethical obligation to cooperate, to consult, and to accept referrals. The MBC should tell them that in no uncertain terms and then require it by rule. 5. Managed care plans are requiring 1 million, 3 million malpractice. Medi-Cal requirement is only 100, 300K. 6. Midwives are not respected as professional healthcare providers, don't have their own board. Susan Jenkins. Most of the members of this MBC know little to nothing about LMs or midwifery or about the terms of the statute that governs LM practice under their jurisdiction. Some of the MBC know nothing about LM education, but it is all there in the LMPA. MBC members don't know LMs are different from nurse midwives, experts in out-of-hospital childbirth, or that LMs do not practice in hospitals. It is onerous and undermines consumer protection and thriving of the profession of midwifery for LMs to be regulated by a board of medicine. LMs need their own board. LM regulation should be spun off as was done with podiatrists and PAs. And that was the report that she asked. Was anyone else on the board in that task force and the council? Do you have anything to add, or?
I think one of the problems as also a provider is how to put the problem into words that can be problems that can be solved. I think it's really difficult to figure out how to solve the problems because the all plan letter that Susan is talking about clearly states to the plans, the Medi-Cal healthcare plans, that they are supposed to provide the service. They're supposed to provide birth centers. They're supposed to provide licensed midwives and out-of-hospital birth, home birth. These are all supposed to be available and accessible to the Medi-Cal beneficiaries. The problem that we're having is, even with this all plan letter, the plans are saying no. And they are requiring that we carry outrageous insurance. And then they also have other, if you can't have insurance, then you can't be a provider. And if you're going to be a provider, you can't do VBAC at home. You have to do it in a birth center. So then if you're a midwife who doesn't have a birth, and I think that with the task force, what we still need to work on is how to present a solution. It's really difficult to figure out how to present a solution. I have a full staff and a biller on staff, and it takes years before I can get these insurance companies to pay the bill, and not many midwives can afford to wait, and birth centers are closing because of this, and women are not getting the care that they are legally entitled to. So I think that the task force is we're still trying to figure out what we can do, but we also want the public to know that we're doing the best that we can. COM is really helping to find out what solutions we can propose so that we can create that access for women.
I think what would be helpful is if I'm not sure if the task force is going to meet again, but I'd like to see more financial data, because money talks. And so if we could know, first of all, the what Medi-Cal covers, how much they're paying for cesareans, versus a midwifery birth or an at-home birth. I mean, I'm sorry, that report was very confusing. Also, there were too many adjectives in there that I just want to say I don't feel comfortable with. Yeah. But I think right now I just know the county, not just the county, but some Medi-Cal providers are giving out money to the community to fund programs that change birth outcomes. So there's some Medi-Cal providers who are looking into that. So money talks. So if we can have more of a report like related to what are the financial outcomes, and also, I mean, what's missing from that is to talk about more than half of births are Medi-Cal participants in California. So what is the cost of that? That's the cost to our state. And if we could lower those costs, and if we're providing better birth outcomes, I think that's just more persuasive. So those are my first thoughts.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Washington State, they did that big study and proved that licensed midwives saved the state $1.2 million a year, and that was big.
I do want to add that we are not paid. We're not paid less than an OB. Right. Our rates are comparable. I think that the problem is that the way that we weigh and value our care and our outcomes doesn't necessarily, I don't know who cares. That's the problem. And so it's not really sustainable for midwives, unfortunately, with what we are paid. It's not sustainable for midwives to have the model that we have. It's very difficult to have our model. And I don't mean to, I know some great OBs. I don't mean to say anything negative towards them, but their model is different. They can see 80 patients in a day and so forth. So I don't know how to solve that either. It'd be great if we could be paid more, but I don't know how that's gonna happen.
Okay.
I just wanted to say something about Miss Abe's comment about the money. So, yes, you get paid the same for a birth, for vaginal birth, as a physician gets paid for vaginal birth. And the facility fee is probably the same as any other birth center facility fee. Where you're saving them money is in the number of cesareans that aren't happening with their resultant side effects and complications. So even though Medi-Cal pays the same for, I believe, for a vaginal birth as it does for a cesarean, are very closely the same. However, we all know that cesarean birth comes with a whole lot more potential complications than a vaginal birth does. It also has to occur in the hospital, where there's all kinds of little add-ons like the IV and the all the things that come with a hospital birth that don't come with a home birth or a birth center birth necessarily. So those are the costs that need to be looked at, is in what we're saving them in terms of the actual outcome for the woman.
But now you're talking about putting value on human life. We do that as midwives, but I don't know that we can.
Well, there is.
Fortunately,
there is value to the system in not necessarily in saving the life, but in not paying for complications that didn't need to happen in the first place. That's where our value lies, is that we know that women who have a cesarean section are much more likely to have a uterine infection than a woman who has a vaginal birth. So what does a uterine infection cost to treat? That's not cheap. So we need to somehow, I don't know how we can get that data, but that's what we need to look at, is how much are those complications costing the Medi-Cal HMO providers and the Medi-Cal system.
But if we were to do that, would our goal be to have codes that paid higher to midwives?
I think that the only place where I'd say that midwives need to be compensated, that they're not being compensated for Medi-Cal birth, is that we get the provider fee, and if it's a birth center birth, you get the facility fee. But if it's a home birth, you're only going to get the provider fee, which is negligible, really. Might as well do it for free.
And you can't charge extra.
And you can't charge anything extra. So that would need to be remedied. But they're already paying that if it's a hospital birth with a doctor. They're already paying a facility fee. So where the savings are is in the complications we're keeping women from having. That's the savings. And we need to somehow quantify that so that we can say, look, by utilizing midwives, you've saved the state X amount of dollars.
Right. And we might be talking about two separate things all at the same time, which is not, I wasn't addressing how much midwives are really making or the sustainability, although, that's important too. But I'm saying, back to what is, first of all, I thought we were talking about access to midwifery care for Medi-Cal, expanding access.
Well, in the report, there's also the code issue, us getting paid for codes and the codes they created for us. And do we have the same access to the codes of the care that we're providing as an OB has access to the codes there? That's is part of the Medi-Cal problem.
But probably not, because the what I'm seeing is that there are barriers to Medi-Cal access, Medi-Cal members having access to licensed midwives and having home birth. It seems like I'm just saying, I just only know Sacramento County is very difficult for that to happen if you have Medi-Cal insurance.
But part of the reason is because midwives can't get sufficiently compensated because the codes don't exist, and we can't get Medi-Cal managed care to accept us as providers.
And
so it's like a package deal, really.
Got you.
And we're being required to have insurance by the managed care
That's
plans that is not required by Medi-Cal. That is impossible.
Right, which is back to, I think people don't understand the value and the savings, and as you brought up, the long-term health benefits for midwifery care. Yeah. So back to data, if you could have some data, we have to persuade those that are in charge of Medi-Cal, the results, the outcomes, also the disparities. So we're got to start somewhere, man.
I think NICU additions are good.
Good point.
Because we have much fewer NICU additions because we do so much, or partly because we do so much postpartum care, yet we can't get compensated for more than one postpartum visit because that's what OBs do. Or that's not, because then it goes into the pediatricians. And so it's all intertwined. And
we can get more, though. If we, as in this perfect scenario, we were actually able to show how much our informed care can create these differences. The managed care plans have the ability to say, okay, you can have more visits. I'm allowed four postpartum visits that I am paid for through Medi-Cal with the managed care plans that I have worked with.
Right, but if we don't have that all on paper to present to the state with, we're saving X hundreds of thousands of dollars in NICU admissions, and as a result of the lower interventions at the birth, the reduced cesareans and whatever, if we can show that we are saving that much money, just like in Washington State, the state will get involved and start making sure that people have access to licensed midwives, because the state doesn't want to pay an extra $1.2 million for unnecessary interventions. That's, I think, the gist of
follow the money.
What Carrie is saying.
I'm not really sure how you would get that. I know that Partnership, because I've worked with them for 25 years, they're really good at providing care that most of the managed cares don't provide. So it's interesting to hear that they're having trouble providing care from licensed midwives, but they might be approachable from the cost savings angle to at least let us in far enough that we could look at what the cost savings might actually be, and give us the data that we need to compile that, those figures. That's an idea.
I've served over 300 people since I started taking Medi-Cal 2 years ago. And the only thing that has been successful so far is working with Quorum to find out what the managed care plans are legally responsible. That is the only thing that has moved them, is understanding that they're breaking the law by not providing. So I don't know how to.
But have you been able to come to them with large data that shows how much money they would actually save?
Actually, because Susan Jenkins did do that. She did give that information. We did present that to them. But it wasn't until we said, you legally have to provide access to care, that they actually, and we had to go to court. She went to court on many cases.
Mm. Well, we have to be more organized in the presentation. So with public comment, you should come and give a public comment, but there shouldn't be back and forth. It's been more flexible because we don't have as many people at MAC meetings, but we do have to keep it moving along, and we have someone who's come up to give a public comment.
My name is Nancy Myrick. I'm a certified nurse midwife, and I'm just here mostly as a representative of the California Nurse Midwives Association. However, I want to take that hot off for a second and be a birth center owner who is in the process of getting Medi-Cal, and have been for 3+ years trying to get that. And our professional application was recently accepted. The facility application has not yet been accepted because, well, it's a long story, but you have to be licensed to become a Medi-Cal facility provider, but you have to be a CPSP provider to get licensed, and you have to be a Medi-Cal provider to get CPSP. So there's some circularness there. We're in that process. I really want to speak to the issue of reimbursement because there is the professional fee reimbursement and there is the facility fee reimbursement. And the professional fee reimbursement is relatively small compared to the facility fee reimbursement. And that is based on sort of how hospitals and medical staff are structured, that the bulk, that when you go to the hospital, the things that are included in the facility fee are the room and the nurses and so both the staff and the facility. Versus at a birth center or home birth, that is all professional. There is not a nursing staff. It's us. So the absolute structure of the codes are not aligned with the actual practice of midwifery, and that's the core. However, the upside of this is when you are presenting to CMS or Medi-Cal, our money savings is in that our facility, if they remain at home or at a birth center, that's their cost savings, that there's not anesthesia, that there is not these extra add-ons. So I think if you're presenting to them the benefit of having Medi-Cal available to more patients, it is the savings on the facility fee side. Thank you.
Any other comments? Obviously, this is going to be a very long-standing task force. Years and years, I imagine. Does the task force have any kind of a recommendation for us to do anything at this point, or is it just going to keep working? What is their path forward? Well, Jocelyn's not really here, and I don't know if
is it
you're prepared.
Possible just to it seems like it would be helpful just to even have this information in a white paper, just what are the key issues so that people are aware. That to me, I just feel like people are aware, but not everyone is aware. So if there's just more, sometimes it's just helpful, I think, but that's just one idea I have.
To make a white paper with the basics.
Well, since the task force is working on it already. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it keeps the conversation going. I just threw that out there.
Mm-hmm.
May I make a comment on that? Calm keeps trying to put forward some information, but things change so rapidly that we keep thinking, okay, we're going to be done with this when we get this answer, and then things change. So we're working on it. So to have some information, at least for the midwives, about Medi-Cal and birth center licensing, and even a white paper. But also for beneficiaries, it would be helpful for them to know how to access licensed midwives through Medi-Cal. So,
oh, good. Thank you.
If someone else wants to work on it on the Mac, that's good too.
So maybe you could get with Jocelyn Dugan afterwards and just maybe discuss a white paper, or what it'll be. We'll put it on the agenda for next meeting as well. So
I have an update about Jocelyn as well. She's going to be taking a formal leave of absence.
Oh, okay.
So I wouldn't count on her being available for another 3 or 4 months.
I think that we could try to work on. I know I personally have just within my birth center the reasons why, for instance, women of color, the outcomes of the women of color within my practice, you can't touch them in a hospital setting. Not just that, but when they talk about their birth stories and their healing births, you can't put a dollar amount on that. But I think that maybe what we could do with the task force is try to reach out also to the other birth centers and find out maybe who they're serving, if they're willing to, which I know they are because they're already on a task force with CALM, who they're serving and what kind of difference they're making, and continue to try to find a way to come up with, we already have so many statistics like AA BC with the outcomes with birth centers, but maybe we can create something that we could prepare for the next meeting to present that could also be used for people who are interested in either one, finding out how to find a midwife, so consumers, and two, midwives, something that they can work on to propose to the managed care plans why it's a good idea for them to contract with them. I mean, that's a start. Codes that Susan brought up, I mean, that we have to do that. We have to work on codes and increasing, all of the fees and so forth. But this is something that's attainable that we could do.
I like the letter. I think that's a good suggestion. Because, I mean, it's good. Sometimes they don't know. But they are mandated to keep those birth outcomes low, and they are too high for women of color. So that would be so useful.
So can we put that? Is there? I'm not sure what the formal way to put that on.
Well, I think we can just have this as a stand. The updates from the task force. So they usually just kind of get put on the agenda each time. So, I think Jocelyn was the main point person. Do you want to maybe take that over and get, call her and see what, okay. Anybody else want to, we don't know what Jocelyn's going to be able to do, so I guess we have to talk with her first, but. Any other comments on this, on the Medi-Cal task force? Okay.
Back to my other hat. On the part of this issue that is specifically related to birth centers and out-of-hospital midwives in general being able to access Medi-Cal, I think there's a lot of overlap with nurse midwives who have those roles, and I would be happy to present back to our Health Policy Committee an interest in being a participant in that portion of it.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Nancy. Okay, moving to agenda number 9, report from the task force on the revision of the guidelines for midwives. And Shaman was the point person, but I believe that Carrie Spearmont is going to do the presentation on this.
Thank you. I want to say, kind of as a starter here, that there were a lot of people that worked on the current draft that I think everybody up there has a copy of now, yeah?
They should.
Okay. I'm sorry that there aren't enough copies to go around to the entire room, but my printer didn't have that much ink. And our main goal was to create a document that was a framework to inform licensed midwives, consumers, and other health professionals that removed any confusion that the current guidelines have presented. Basically what we did was, in terms of substantial things, is there is we changed the name slightly, and we added a paragraph at the top, the second paragraph there, that this document is meant as a guide only to the practice of licensed midwifery in California and is not intended to be a standard of care for licensed midwives in California, and it was not created or enforced through any applicable statute or regulation. I think the young woman that spoke earlier today is a classic example of what has been happening with the guidelines as they've appeared on the website for the last, 6 years or however long they've been up there. And that is that they are viewed as law, which they never were. They were a document that was moved from being our standard of care, which was codified through the regulatory process. And then they became guidelines so that they were still there to inform, but they have gotten misunderstood by consumers and and midwives and physicians for sure. And so our goal was to make sure that up front it said that, so that it was clear to everybody that they were just guidelines. There's some rearrangement of paragraphs within Roman numeral 1, 2, and 3. We didn't delete anything there. We added a clarification of the postpartum period to be 6 weeks postpartum, because it's a pretty standard accepted definition in the healthcare professions. And we wanted it to be clear that it is part of midwifery care to continue to care for both the mother and the newborn during that period, as long as both are in the normal range of things, which is stated, of course, other places in this document. I am aware that in some areas of the state, midwives have felt that they couldn't do things like administer the newborn screening exam to a healthy newborn, because they weren't doing it in the immediate postpartum period, and it needed to be done, maybe a day later, and so they were referring those babies to hospitals to get that done. So that's why that bit was inserted there to define that. I did move the emergency exemption clause up to section 3, number 8, because it used to be kind of buried in the lists of conditions to refer for. So it seemed reasonable to put it there. And we decided that removing all of the lists that were conditions for which you should refer for was advisable at this point, because without the standard of care regulation that was the framework for creating those lists, there were some items that were being misinterpreted in terms of whether or not a referral was required. And since this document does not have any force of law behind it, it didn't seem reasonable to leave the lists anymore. So I'm open to questions.
I would like to say that any proposed guideline changes would have to go to the medical board for approval.
Yeah, I'm aware of that.
And it should be done in track changes, because this is very difficult for staff, and it would be difficult for members to see exactly what you've done.
I could totally send that to you, Carrie, if you'd like me to. I find trying to read a document with a lot of track changes in it more difficult than presenting it the way you want it to end up. I am happy to send you one with track changes, and you can distribute it to the members if that's appropriate, or to the members of MAC if people would prefer that. I'm happy to do that. There are no substantive changes besides the addition of that paragraph saying that it's not created as a result of statute or regulation, and removing all the lists. There's nothing else substantive that was changed. And that's why I did it this way. It was because it was really easy to explain that nothing substantive changed, except that there's some reordering of some of the paragraphs, and all of the lists were removed. But I'm more than happy to give that to you if you'd like to see it in a track changes kind of format. Anybody else have any questions? I'm hoping that there will The task force is hoping that there will be a motion to forward this on to the board for approval.
Is this the first time that the MAC has seen it?
This is the first time. Yeah. Well,
Besides
no,
those of us who worked on it.
so the people that worked on it have seen it. Yeah, Diane has seen it
Yeah,
before now.
It's my
and,
first time
And
seeing
Shemin saw it. Yeah. So those of
But
us
the
that
MAC
worked
as a
on
whole,
it
yes, it's the first
saw it.
time.
Yeah.
Thanks for your work on it. Yeah, I think it would need more time to more time. That's all. Maybe another few times for discussion. It seems.
Do you have? I'd like to entertain suggestions if, for what the discussion would be around, when we reconvene in March, for instance. What more would you like to see? Would you like to see see it in track changes? Would you like to have the whole document? You want them side by side? What would you like to see? Clearly, it would be good to have it in your packet ahead of time, but I didn't realize that I was on point for this until the beginning of the week, so that's why it didn't appear in your packets.
I would like to see the track changes.
Okay. Should I then? Do you want me to submit that to staff to get into the packets before the next meeting? Is that how you'd like that to happen?
That would work.
Okay. I'm not any longer clear who the staff person is that it should go to. So maybe I'll send it to Diane and let her distribute it. Does that work?
Sure.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Great. And I'll probably do that sooner rather than later because it works better that way to.
Me too. Or else I'll forget about it.
You know, if
Yep.
we get it done on the front end rather than trying to do it on the end. Yeah.
Thank you for working with us on this. It was really educational. I think it's great, and I think everyone else will as well once they have
As
a
one
look
of
at
the
it.
original authors of the document, it was important to me to work on it and have it come out well. Do you want to say something, Claudia?
Yeah, I'm curious as to why you took out all the lists.
The reason we removed the lists is because the lists remain in the standard of care document, which is at least available on CALM's website. People can get it from me as well. I know it's been removed from the board's website, but the regulation is still in effect. So that document effectively is law till it's repealed. Am I not correct about that? I mean, it could be challenged, I suppose, but
Right. The issue is AB 1308 made changes. The regulation is not consistent with all the changes from
Right.
AB 1308. And so the intention is to go through the regulatory process. We were hoping to be able to do it all at once with the regulations that are required pursuant to 1308.
right.
But it's the statute and the guidelines that the MAC and the board agreed to that are operative. Guidelines are guidelines. They're not statute or regulation. They're there to be helpful. And if something is if the midwife is facing something that's not addressed by the guidelines, or there's particular circumstances that make it necessary to deviate from the guidelines, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a breach of the standard of care.
Well, the reason that we discussed removing the lists and came to that conclusion is that, particular to VBAC, what remained in the guidelines is a sentence that says that you will refer if the woman has had a history of prior uterine surgery. But what didn't remain in the guideline was the fact that when the standard of care was adopted originally, that sentence relied on Part B of the regulation in 1379.19, and I keep repeating that just for the record. The Part B of that regulation referred specifically to how to treat VBAC. So it was always clear when we had that regulation that VBAC and prior cesarean was not the same as prior uterine surgery, that they were treated as two different issues. And when we moved the guidelines, we moved the standard of care into being guidelines, we didn't address that. And having that list still there that says prior uterine surgery must be referred for confuses physicians, particularly physicians that are given it to review licensed midwife cases, and it confuses the public. Because that sentence never, ever meant prior cesarean, but it's not clear from looking at the lists and the guidelines. Additionally, the guidelines themselves never went through a formal rulemaking process after we made changes to them in 2014 that we made because AB 1308 made changes to our scope of practice, essentially. And so we changed those things in the guidelines, but then we didn't ever add a sentence that said, this doesn't mean C-section, prior C-section, to that piece. And at this point, it seems prudent to remove the lists and proceed with either getting the regulations that AB 1308 asked us to do, or getting the law changed so that we don't have to do that anymore, or there's some modification to how we do it or what's included. Because it's a problematic thing for the board, it's a problematic thing for consumers, it's a problematic issue for midwives not knowing specifically where they have to make a referral and where they don't. And all they have to go by at this point is guidelines that weren't adopted in any formal rulemaking process, or they can refer back to the regulation, which is 1379.19, and look at the standard of care. But the consumers can't easily access the standard of care because it's not on the board's website anymore. And they would only know to go to CALM or to me if they were a midwife. So it removes a whole lot of confusion to remove the lists. And then we can work on the list that AB 1308 asked to be made, and go from there. So that's the why.
Mm-hmm. And you think that's less confusing than adding the clarification and the text of
I think it's more. I think it's more legal, and I think it's more fair to have public input, midwifery input into any document that is going to be interpreted by the public as something that is law, and that's how this has been interpreted in the past. And I think that the fair way to do it is to do it according to the laws of the state, which say that you go through a formal rulemaking process. The legislature told us what to do, and we should do it that way.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I had a more formal statement to make on CALM's position on this, but I think it mostly just repeats in a formal way what Carrie just said, is that, we don't have a formal rulemaking in place, and therefore it needs to be clear to everyone that the guidelines are not rule of law. Anyway, do you think there's anything more to be said on it?
Read that, or you're welcome to.
I would prefer to read it because it is, it's a very convoluted issue.
Yeah.
And I think to formally put it on record might be helpful. So COM's position with this deals with the issues that are presently of concern to California licensed midwives regarding the guidelines that are currently on the medical board website, specifically whether the legal scope of practice for licensed midwives in the state has been restricted by legislation, by the medical board rules, or by medical board developed guidelines, resulting in limiting the provision of midwifery care in accordance with the nationally recognized scope of practice for community midwives in the United States. These concerns are a result of a set of practice guidelines that were adopted by the board in 2014 with the stated purpose of providing some guidance to LMs in the absence of 16 CCR 1379-19, which established a standard of care for licensed midwives and concurrently provided a formula for consenting a client who desired a vaginal birth after a previous cesarean delivery. The former standard of care document was amended to comply with some of the language of AB 1308, but was not meant to replace the requirement for a formal regulation as required by AB 1308, Section 2, 2507(3), which required a list of conditions for which a licensed midwife would refer a client to a physician. It was also understood in 2014 that the resulting guidelines had no force of law behind them because they did not go through an official rule-making procedure. This has led over time to confusion among all parties, the licensees and consumers alike, about the required procedure for medical board to promulgate enforceable regulations. COM has studied this issue in some detail and sought advice from attorneys who are familiar with midwifery practice laws and administrative agencies. Based upon their legal analysis, COM has determined the following points. The law is clear that, unless adopted as a rule under the Administrative Procedure Act rulemaking procedure, practice guidelines or standards of care do not meet requirements as rules or regulations. Restrictions on midwifery scope of practice that are based on guidelines cannot be enforced unless the guidelines have been officially adopted as rules in an APA-compliant rulemaking, which would require legislative authority to do so. Thus, the medical board cannot enforce guidelines as they were adopted in 2014 because it didn't go through the official rulemaking procedure as required by the APA. Therefore, medical board does not have the jurisdiction to restrict licensed midwife scope of practice to anything narrower than the nationally recognized practice norms. It may only take such actions by formal rulemaking under the California APA. Attempts to adopt guidelines without official APA rulemaking constitutes what California Administrative Law and State Office of Administrative Law refer to as underground regulations, which are not valid. Using guidelines in this manner is contrary to the scope of authority that was delegated to the medical board by the legislature. And likewise, no statute or rule has repealed the existing regulations under 16 CCR 1379-19. Subsection A of that rule provides for the formal adoption of the 2005 LM standards, while subsection B details the informed consent process for VBAC clients. This rule has not been repealed, but remains in effect on the medical board websites and Office of Administrative Law. AB 1308 did not formally repeal this rule directly or by implication. According to APA and Administrative Office of Administrative Law rules, an agency can only repeal its regulations through an APA formal rulemaking. It appears from statements by medical board members and representatives of California Medical Association and the state ACOG that the board will not take regulatory action with respect to licensed midwives because the medical associations won't approve them. The medical board considers CMA and ACOG stakeholders whose approval is needed for board action on licensed midwives. CMA and ACOG effectively have veto power over proposed medical board rules for licensed midwives, essentially ignoring APA procedures. This is an example of a negative phenomenon called regulatory capture. In essence, the board has redelegated to the medical associations the regulatory authority delegated to the medical board by the legislature. Delegated government power cannot legally be redelegated to private entities such as the medical associations, much as they couldn't allow Quorum to dictate regulations. Quorum believes that the medical board should protect consumers, midwifery consumers in this case, and put the needs of physicians, and not put the needs of physicians above those consumers. Midwifery is not the practice of medicine. Quorum is concerned that members and their clients are under the jurisdiction of a licensing board whose professional members are physicians and therefore competitors of licensed midwives, and whose consumer members, however well-meaning, are not midwifery consumers. As a competitor-driven agency, combined with veto power ceded to the medical board by organized medicine, this can easily lead to attempted restraints on trade against midwives and their clients. This situation is similar in many ways to the North Carolina Dental Board versus Federal Trade Commission case that was decided a few years ago by the Supreme Court. Quorum believes that attempts by the medical board, the medical associations, to restrict scope of practice are anti-competitive restraints on licensed midwives and their clients. Therefore, we support if these changes are made, that it may make clear that they are not rules, and that the rulemaking process be respected as the rule of law.
Thank you. You're right, it was a little complicated.
It didn't sound like something you'd memorize.
No. Are there any more comments from the members or the audience? So I think where we're at is that we're asking the task force to bring this back to us next time with track changes. Right? Okay.
Yep. And I'll work on getting it to you, Diane, in the next few weeks, and then you can. Diane can then send it to staff, and staff can send it out to people to look at before the next meeting, right? Okay. All right, super. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your work on this, Carrie. And Shaman and Rosanna, everybody who worked on it. Okay, the next agenda item 10, is a report from the task force on the challenges obtaining Social Security numbers and electronic filing of birth certificates.
And hence my earlier concern about how long everything takes. So I worked on this with Rachel Fox Tierney. Diane and I received a request at the beginning of September for specific instances and counties that clients were having difficulty obtaining Social Security numbers, as the previous executive director wanted to look into it. On September 20th, Diane and I sent separate reports. I summarized what the issue is and some of the history of it. Diane had forwarded along some of the comments. I added newer comments that I had gotten or that had come to me alone. And then on October 4th, Jennifer Simoes asked for permission to forward those reports to the CDPH, and I gave her permission along with new information that I had gotten with a client who had recently gone to get a Social Security number, and it had taken 3 different visits and multiple different things to be ultimately told, oh yeah, everything you need is here. But it just took getting to the right person. Since then, it's my understanding that the midwives, that the Social Security office director in Sacramento told at least one practice that they were no longer accepting any documentation at all from licensed midwives, and cited a non-existent federal law to back that up. Meanwhile, Rachel, who has a relationship with Heather Kellogg from the CDPH, she's the head of the Birth and Marriage Registration section of the Vital Records Registration Board. And she was going to look into the possibility of midwives being able to submit electronically, submit birth certificates electronically, and also try to figure out where this directive that they were not allowed to check the box on AVIS that allowed for automatic Social Security number generation. She passed it on to the people that they get passed on to, and has not heard back yet, so we have not heard back yet.
I also just have an update. So I took that information that you sent me and sent along to CDPH. I have a contact, Dr. Green. He's over the Center for Health Informatics, I think, and Statistics, which is over Office of Vital Records. So we attempted to set up a meeting in November with everything going on. There was a scheduling conflict, actually, like the day of the meeting. And then with vacations, we actually have a meeting set up for December 17th to discuss this. They did look at your information. They said they're well aware of the issue, and what we're meeting with them about is what you said, is the feasibility of being able to enter that information electronically, because as you know, we don't have really control over what the federal government says on Social Security. But what we can work on is see if there's any solutions in what California controls in the Office of Vital Records. So that meeting is on December 17th, so I'll provide an update at the next MAC meeting.
Great. At the same time, we heard from a number of people that there are, of course, many issues with birth certificates, but one of them was that midwives are not being listed on birth certificates. Births are being registered where we provide all of the documentation and the affidavit and the letters and all of that we're still not getting those births attributed to us, and that there was a huge discrepancy. Rosanna worked on this issue, and I was going to paraphrase what you put out in your email, but I would welcome your firsthand report on that.
Yeah, I think I've found out subsequent information.
Great.
So the birth registration has, for the providers, the only choices are physician, nurse midwife, other midwife, and other. And therefore, if, for instance, a student midwife is recorded, or a lay midwife is recorded as being attendant at the birth, that goes into other midwife. In addition to that, so the vital records clerks, it would help them immensely in recording the birth properly for us. If when we register the birth, we only put, so there in the form where it says license number, to put LM and your 3-digit code. And that's it. Do not include CPM. If you're also a nurse midwife, then you need to make a decision about whether you're registering the birth as a nurse midwife or an LM. And I'm in discussion with them about the possibility of, I don't know whether California has the discretion to do this or not, but if they are a lay midwife, since in California they're not authorized to practice, that they would go in that other category with paramedics and family members that may have attended the birth in lieu of a professional. So was that all?
Yeah, so when you are signing your name, it was my understanding to just put, like I would put Claudia Brelia LM rather than Claudia Brelia LM CPM.
Yes, don't put the CPM in.
Okay, so
It's just one box for license number. It's not your name and that. It's just your license number.
well, there is a line for your name and address.
Right, but they're
So-
separate.
Right. So in the box for your license, you would put just the LM number.
No.
But then in the line where you're signing your name, just sign LM. Is my understanding.
Just sign LM.
Right, or just sign CPM, or not just sign CPM, or just sign CNM, but don't add a whole bunch.
Don't add.
Don't add.
But also in the number, include the prefix LM.
Yes.
Yeah, very important. Because that'll show up then in their pull down and just make the data more accurate.
So once we get a little more information and Jennifer has the meeting and all of that, it just seems that, the thing that's confusing is that some counties, it works perfectly. So the Social Security issue it's not that it's a national Social Security issue. It's the people working in the offices that are interpreting it or that have their own bias and prejudice against, midwives or the clients or their color or their skin or whatever it is. There's a bias against those people that, the people that are working in the offices. It's not coming from national. So maybe I don't know who would be the person to sign the letter, but we could create a letter that went out once again to all the Social Security offices or to all the birth certificate, all the offices of biostatistics, signed by somebody with authority that says, listen, licensed midwives are authorized to file birth certificates and you should take their information and give them Social Security numbers. It's crazy. Depending on where you live, you can get one.
One of the things that struck me was the similarity to many, many years ago when we were dealing with midwives being unable to get lab accounts because a directive had gone out stating that from whoever it is who licenses clinical labs, that they were required to have, since midwives were required to have supervising physicians, they were required to have that supervising physician's signature on file in order to have a lab account for a licensed midwife. So when I brought that letter in as part of the Barriers to Care document that was done many years ago, it turns out that directive should not have been sent out and was not appropriate. And so a new directive was sent out saying, yeah, that's wrong. You need to give accounts for licensed midwives without the signature of their supervising physician, and that's actually what the law says. That's the actual interpretation. So it seems to me that this directive that doesn't allow registrars to check the box that generates Social Security numbers automatically, which I have not been able to find or get my hands on or figure out where it came from, that if a new directive was sent out saying that, yes, actually, they should check the box, that could, in the interim of solving the overall problem, it could solve this smaller problem, or this, it could be one possible fix.
So related to the automatic enumeration of Social Security numbers, there are 20 other states where that is possible for home birth and for birth center care. In California, it's grayed out and not available when the birth happened outside of the hospital. Mm-hmm. So that's a state level thing that needs to get done. Okay. The other related issue that's come to our attention around birth certificates is that in the county of Los Angeles, the Vital Records Office is requiring paperwork signed only by a physician in order to get the birth registered and get a birth certificate that verifies that the baby was born live.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the pediatrician one. There's a county...
Yes, but on what authority are they doing that? That's not a state requirement.
Everyone's making it up.
And everyone's allowed to make it up. In, I forget what county I used to do births. It was up in the mountains. They required a home visit by a home visiting nurse from public health before they would register.
It's very strong language. They say they're going to send out investigators if they don't see a physician and get this done. It's anyway, I've asked the state level vital records folks to look into that. So.
Well, electronic filing would definitely help a big portion of it, so that would be good. And if we could work on the automatic enumeration, once we can electronically file, then maybe it will all be solved.
Did we also have an issue with discrimination? Was that part of the issue as well?
The accounts that we have had have said that.
So there's two problems.
Well, if it's left up to the discretion of the individual at the counter on the day, it depends on who's at the counter, who's accepting the paperwork, who the clients are. It is disproportionately affecting clients of color. And that is all part of everything is according to everyone's individual discretion.
Are there any consequences for discrimination in these offices? Is that there?
Right. So right now they're saying it's because they're out of hospital births or they're LM-attended births. Mm-hmm.
But not everybody is getting turned away.
Many people are. I mean, in Sacramento,
but when people of color are feeling that there are more people of color being turned away, then
midwives are feeling that it happens more often to their clients of color. We don't have actual numbers, but in the past that did seem, especially in Sacramento, and apparently still in Sacramento, that seems to be the case. However, they've now said they are no longer accepting any documentation from licensed midwives. So there you go.
It just seems like there should be some legal ramifications.
Right. So there should be, absolutely. In San Diego County, though, we're not having these same issues. Many of the letters that we get from San Diego are, oh, well, we just use this letter and it's not a problem. So, like I said, it's as with the birth certificate issue, that's not me, is it? As with the birth certificate issue, it depends on who's in charge of the office, who's at the counter, and, how they're feeling that day. What's the phase of the moon?
I'm sorry, just off topic. I just wanted to do a time check because I wanted to weigh in on option 12, so I wasn't sure if what the time will be. Sorry to bring up the time.
We're running late.
Okay. Well, I might have to leave, so I had an opinion about that. So.
Do we have any more comments on this issue, on the birth certificate issue? It seems like once Ms. Simoes meets with her person, maybe we'll get a little more clarification and steps needed to take. So I think we just have to, this is one of those task force that's also going to be an ongoing task force, ongoing work to get some of these issues solved. So let's see, discussion, possible action. Do you want to move to can we reorder it and just do the dates really quick? What time do you have to go?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
What time do you have to go?
I'm not sure how long it'll take you. If you said 5 minutes, then I'd be okay. But if it goes 20 minutes, I'll
Program
need to leave.
update, she's usually pretty good.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, all right.
Okay, please turn to tab 11A1 of the packet for the Midwifery Program licensing statistics. In the first quarter of the fiscal year 2019-2020, the board received 9 new applications, issued 11 new licenses, and renewed 38 licenses. As of October 1st, 2019, there were 431 renewed and current midwifery licenses. Please turn to page 11B1. In the first quarter of the fiscal year 2019-2020, the board received 34 transfer of planned out-of-hospital delivery to hospital reporting forms for licensed midwives. Please turn to page 11C1 for enforcement statistics for licensed midwives. In the first quarter, the board received 4 complaints, and none of those were referred for investigation. Please turn to page 11C2. The board received 4 complaints in the first quarter of 2019-2020 for unlicensed midwives. Please turn to page 11C3 for enforcement statistics for transfer of planned out-of-hospital delivery to hospital reporting forms for licensed midwives. In the first quarter of the 2019-2020 fiscal year, 0 were referred for investigation. And please turn to page 11C4 for the first quarter of the 2019-2020 fiscal year. The board received 0 transfer planned out-of-hospital delivery to hospital reporting forms for unlicensed midwives. Any questions?
I have a question. I thought, I remember I was trying to look through the notes here. We had asked that we might be able to find out where the transfer forms were coming from, like what region they were coming from or what city that they were coming from. So that we knew we were wondering what those numbers look like and if truly there was that hospitals from everywhere were reporting, or if there were only certain areas that was being done. Do we have that?
Christine, would you like to answer that? I know that might have been a conflict of interest because it might have given too much information as to what hospital they were coming from. I don't know do you recall that?
Okay, I know we had asked about that in the last meeting, so is there an official way that we can request that we find out if it's coming from, can you tell me how that works? How we officially just ask that we could hear that at the next meeting? Is that all I have to say and it's done? Oh, great.
You've made the request. I think that the issue is going to be whether it reveals too much information so that people can be identified, but it will be looked at again, and if staff deems that it's appropriate to release, then we'll make sure it's in the next report.
Great. Any other comments from the members or from the audience? All right. Thank you, Mrs. Moriarty. Okay, well, great. We got to item 12, discussion and possible action on the dates. So let's see, we have some proposed dates under tab 12. March 5th or March 12th. I would propose March 12th.
And I would propose March 5th.
Oh.
I like the 5th.
Can more people do the 5th as opposed to the 12th?
I have no opinion.
I have no opinion.
Okay, so let's see. I guess then we'll just go with the 5th. Okay, moving to August.
Should we consider moving the August meeting to coincide with the legislation release?
Or the December meeting?
Oh, was it December?
Well, it's
I don't
November.
know.
It's
Whichever one.
November that the board gets the legislative suggestions. So I don't know which one makes more. If we move that to November, that means we're not having a meeting from March to November and then another one in December. So it might make more sense to, if we want to do that, if we feel a need to do that, move the December meeting as opposed to the August meeting.
If I understand the process correctly, though, if the information about what they will be proposing isn't available until, is it November? And then their meeting, I'm confused about dates, but that even if we meet after that, we can't make a formal recommendation until after that medical board meeting. Like we can make a we can ask to have it put on the agenda, that we can that we can make a presentation, but then it doesn't give us enough time to actually make a presentation or put together a presentation.
I think one of the concerns was is that we would find out about any legislation being proposed before a meeting as opposed to before the medical board meeting. Because the reason it happened, the reason that the VBAC legislation got proposed before we heard about it was because of the way our meetings fell. Because they always do their legislation proposals in November. Am I correct?
Or it's the fall meeting, so it could be November, it could be October.
Okay.
The other thing, I'll let Jen speak.
When we bring legislative proposal ideas to the board, they're just staff ideas. And so if the board says yes, like for instance, if the board would have said yes, right, at our November meeting, your next meeting is in December. The legislature's not even back in session this year until January 6th. So I'm likely not even going to find an author. I mean, the bill introduction deadline is February. There's still time to get input in. If the board decides ultimately to say no, then you would have probably done a lot of work and they would say yes or no. I mean, I think there's a lot of points for public input by MAC. So like you saw at the board meeting, a lot of public showed up and the board made their decision on whether or not to go forward with that legislation or not go forward. And if the board would have said yes, then there would have been multiple points through the process. So we would have had this December meeting. If the board would have said yes, I would have gone up during legislation and said, the board had this idea, and we would have got all the input from MAC or interested parties. And then once I actually find an author in the legislature, then it has to go through all the policy committees of the legislature. There's ample opportunity for testimony for, both sides to come up and say whatever they want. It has to go through appropriations committee. So I guess what I'm saying is, bringing that idea to the board is a very like pre-step of the process. And so even if they would have said yes, in this case they said no, the December meeting would have given plenty of time. And when at that point, I wouldn't even have time to go to the legislature to find an author. The legislature's still not in session. So I'm just not sure like what a big of a difference it's going to be, because ultimately it's still staff ideas. We're bringing it to the board. And then that's kind of your way to tell the board what you think. So even if we had a meeting before, I would have still given my presentation, and maybe I would have said, but I wouldn't have needed to, right? Because there was all those people that were providing input. I just don't like. You're trying to kind of rearrange, and I'm not sure how much of a difference it's going to make, because there's so many opportunities for public input and for input from the MAC.
The other thing is that something may come up that prompts a proposal, and if it's there and agendized and posted 10 days before, that's all the time staff needs. And so you may plan to have a meeting in mid-October, but there's things that staff tries to address, and so this may still happen. So you have to factor that in whether you want to change the timing.
I don't know. I think at this point it's probably not worth struggling over it at this late time in the day. Do you think we need to move it?
The August 27th sounds fine. No, I feel like I'm getting a lot of explanations, but I just thought they said we already met. The MAC had met, and so we couldn't give the MAC any notification because you guys weren't meeting. But I might have misheard it. It doesn't matter at this point. I hear what she's saying, that we would have had other times to chime in. Mm-hmm. But I think getting in on the ground floor is still important. I know it's late in the evening, but sometimes things happen late in the evening. They slide in because people are tired. Mm-hmm. But again, going back to the opening with that lady crying, that's her whole life on the line. So ideas change lives, and I just still think that the only point of thinking about the calendar is so we can be a part, and the MAC wasn't a part of that, and it impacted the MAC. It wasn't a random law, so that's why I brought up the calendar. Move on. Mm-hmm.
It doesn't sound like our meeting in relation to the medical board meeting is the issue. The issue is still that why would staff not come to the Midwifery Advisory Council before proposing to the medical board regarding midwifery legislation? And I think that's where we are feeling slighted, is that we had no input into what the staff recommendations to the medical board were. Not that, so it's not where we are in relation to the medical board. It's we are a standing committee to give recommendations to the medical board about midwifery issues and midwifery legislation, and it doesn't feel good that staff is proposing recommendations about midwifery legislation without first talking to the Midwifery Advisory Council. And it really doesn't have to do with timing of the meetings.
It does and it doesn't. There's all kind of strategies that are used. But I think, not to belabor it, but to belabor it, it said you guys don't count. So
right. Exactly.
I want to understand how to use my time effectively here.
If we moved it, we wouldn't know when to move it. Or does the medical board already have their fall meeting?
I'm sure we do. I don't have the date offhand. It's either end of October or beginning November.
Yeah.
Do we always hold the meeting in August historically? Okay.
Or July, yeah.
Oh, in July.
Or July, August.
Well, why not just move it just to try it out? It doesn't seem like it would harm anything. I don't know. But if not, I'd say go with August 27th.
But would we move the December meeting then? Make it earlier.
The August one later.
The issue too is it has to be spaced out so staff can get work done for all the meetings.
Well, maybe what we should do is think about it for right now. Do we? Well, I don't know. I don't know what. I guess we have to decide, don't we?
Can we make the March meeting and then table the other two
Yes.
to talk about next time? And think about it and
Sounds good.
Okay, is that, do I want to just table it, or should we choose some dates in case we decide not to? I don't know. What's the best way and most efficient?
What are our options?
Step.
So we could do like June and no, in October early before the fall meeting, or what are the options that we have on the calendar? What's the spacing? What does it need to look like?
I think
we don't know yet. That's why we would need to table it to find that out.
Well, and we'd have to
Well,
sit
we
down
know
with
when
staff
fall
and find
is.
out what works in their schedules too.
But we know that their fall meeting is going to be October, November, correct?
The medical board, yeah.
It's November 12th and 13th.
Okay, so then we,
So then we could have a meeting in October. And would that be replacing the August meeting or the December meeting?
I don't feel prepared to be able to figure that
but we're not going to see each other again until next year, so.
till March. If we tabled the rest of the discussion till we had time to sit down with staff and figure out their timing and our timing and figure it out.
Yeah, yeah.
Keep in mind that the agenda items have to be approved by the board also prior to, so there would have to be a board meeting prior to approve those agenda items.
Oh, right. It's also complicated.
Can I just say something real quick? Because staff isn't saying it, but I'm pretty sure that at least historically, they pick these dates because that's when they have time on their schedule and they give you two options. And you're not going to be able to pick a date today that's going to be okay with them. You're still going to have to decide in March, so you might as well just table it till March. And if you want to ask them to give you some alternative dates and alternative months, then you'd have them in March.
Does it help you if we pick a date in August and December right now and then but then revisit changing them, or no? I know.
It's one of the goals that we're considering that we want to meet before their fall meeting.
Yeah.
So then it seems like it would not be that difficult to propose dates today and then change them if they didn't work out, correct? No? I must be missing something.
I'd like to know, is it only staff that brings proposed regulation to the board in that fall meeting?
No.
Who can bring?
Even at this meeting, there is public comment. So we had individuals come up to say that they were seeking legislative support for a bill to require physicians to give informed consent when they're receiving money from a product manufacturer. And that's part of their recommended treatment, is that they use this product on this patient. They need to give informed consent for that. And so,
but that's not coming.
That's not coming from
as
staff.
regulation from the medical board.
No, people people bring that to the medical board as a proposal that they'll be seeking support for the board from.
So we could consider July and November and not December, correct?
What if instead we asked to have on the August agenda to receive a report of any proposed midwifery legislation that would be recommended to the board?
But they just said they only need 10 days to come up with whatever it is that they're going to present, is what I'm understanding.
That's correct.
So it would make more sense if we met the first week of November, which is whatever they're going to bring up or propose we would be able to know about.
No.
No?
Staff would oppose having a MAC meeting in November when 2 weeks later we've got a board meeting.
Okay, so our hands are tied then with what we're thinking about as far as dates go.
You're not tied. It's just that we can't answer date questions right now except to say there would be an objection to having a MAC meeting so close to a board meeting. But you could vote on March 5th or March 12th and have a further discussion where we had more information to offer you.
That sounds good. I propose we go with March 5th and table it until March 5th. Or I make a motion.
I'll second that.
All right. Do we have to vote on that, or is this a voting thing? Yeah, okay. Mrs. Moore?
Ms. Abe?
Yes.
Dr. Adams?
No.
Ms. Brelia?
Yes.
Ms. Perez?
No.
Ms. Holzer?
That would be nice to know. Yes. Are we tied?
No. It passed.
All right, so we'll wait till next time. All right, so what do we I guess we're going to ask staff to come back with some proposed dates, different dates that are before the board meeting then. That works for everybody, for staff mainly.
I think we need further discussion and we will get back with you.
Okay, sounds great. Okay, so we're on the last agenda item then.
Are we going to talk about December, or are we going to table that as well?
I think she said to just table both of them as well.
Okay.
So future agenda items would be the reports from all the task forces that we had this time, right? And all the program reports and licensing reports that we usually have from staff. I feel like there was something new. What was it? Oh, we just, we decided that I'm not going to call it revisions, but review of the Almar data is now a standing agenda item. What else was there?
I don't know quite how to state this, but I think that perhaps in the March meeting, we could have discussion on how to handle kind of what happened, because I understand it feels like this committee was excluded, but I think the board can do it regardless. And I think if we had some kind of plan for, okay, this we know can happen in November, how do we want to handle this if it does. Because I think trying to have a meeting, I mean, I want to make an agenda item to discuss. Because I think trying to have a meeting 2 weeks before the board meeting and putting off everything else doesn't serve this body. But I think that we could maybe a task force or that to deal with or to watch or to contact. So I'd like to put that on the agenda for March.
We're going to have to talk about dates.
Right, the dates will be on there. I can't remember what it was. There was something. Oh, I can't remember what it is. Still there. All right, I guess that's the future agenda items. I know there's something else. I can't remember what it was. If I think of it, I'll do it. Okay, so if there's anything anybody wants to add, this is the last chance. Okay, then I guess the meeting is adjourned.